Hello, my name is Randy Spalding, Executive Director of the Washington State Board of Education. Welcome to this discussion on career readiness and work integrated learning. In Washington, as in many other states, state agencies, schools, private sector employers, labor, and non-government organizations are working together to design the next generation of work integrated learning experiences and programs to ensure students have the skills they need to enter well-paying jobs and or continue their education. Thank you for joining us for the second of a two-part webinar exploring the experiences in 7 states as we consider innovative approaches to work integrated learning such as youth apprenticeship, internship, and career and technical education. This webinar builds on work supported by a grant from NASBE looking at the state board's role in career readiness. Yesterday, we heard from Indiana, Louisiana, Virginia, and Washington. Today, we will hear from Colorado, Delaware, Kentucky, and again from Washington. We will have brief presentations from each state, followed by a discussion among panelists. You're welcome to submit questions during the conversation using the comment box. And as Tony mentioned, we do ask that participants keep their microphones muted during the webinar. At this point, it's my pleasure to introduce Robert Hull, Vice President of National Association for State Boards of Education.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you for joining this second portion of our two-day online forum, co-sponsored with the Washington State Board of Education. It's our pleasure to welcome you here to the webinar. And if yesterday's webinar is any indication, you're in for a real treat today, as we learned so much yesterday from the states that presented their work on the webinar. It is our pleasure here at NASBE to partner with the Washington State Board of Education on this particular endeavor. Here at NASBE, one of the ways that we engage with state boards of education is to provide very small and modest stipends or grants to states to work in partnership with other states to learn together on a particular topic. And the work that is being presented today by the state of Washington and this webinar is a part of a grant that we have from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. We're very appreciative of their sponsorship of this work. And it's a way for state boards of education to not only develop their own knowledge, but to share their expertise with other states that we learn together as an organization. And we here at NASBE just really value this type of engagement. And the state of Washington has been absolutely wonderful as a partner with this work. And we, the staff, Randy and Parker and Linda have just been excellent to work with. Thank you for your endeavors and thank you for your efforts. And also, I'd like to offer a thanks to Don Long, our Director of Teaching, Leading, and Learning here at NASBE, who has shepherded this process. So I know there are folks anxiously waiting to hear the work in states, and they don't need to hear any more from me, so I just say welcome again, and we look forward to learning together here today. Thanks much.
Thanks, Robert. I'd now like to introduce MJ Bolt, who is a Washington State Board of Education member, and she also participates on our governor's Government and Education Work Group for Career Connected Learning. MJ will be moderating the discussion today, and so MJ, go ahead and take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. And thanks, Robert, as well, for your information about NASBE and the collaboration. I think we all can say how much we appreciate this opportunity from Washington State, as well as just the opportunity to connect with other states across our nation. I think we've got darn near the 4 corners covered today. So thank you again for that. And welcome, everyone, to the second part of this webinar series. Thanks for joining us today. I know, as Robert said, yesterday was very informational, very helpful. So I'm definitely looking forward to hearing from all of our panelists today. Remember too that you can send any questions in the chat box as we're going along or towards the end if we have time. Hopefully we'll get to them at the end. We do have some question and answer time. But if not, we will definitely follow up and give the panelists the opportunity to respond to those questions, and then we'll post those on our website along with the recorded webinar and any other information. So So without further ado, let's move on and hear from our first state today. We're going to be hearing from Colorado, and we're happy to have as presenters today Gretchen Morgan, who is the president of CareerWise Colorado, and Misti Ruthven, who is the executive director of innovation and pathways with the Colorado Department of Education. Gretchen, Misti, welcome, and take care away.
Thanks, MJ. This is Gretchen Morgan. Misti, do you want to introduce yourself too?
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. This is Misti Ruthven with the Colorado Department of Education. We're pleased to join you.
And Misti's actually going to kick us off. So
great.
Go ahead and go to the next slide.
Thanks, Gretchen. So a little bit about Colorado, just to give you a lay of the land before we jump in and talk to you about the exciting work-based opportunities that we're working on in Colorado, is we have about 900,000 K-12 students, and that is encompassing our entire state and 178 school districts. To give you a little bit about Colorado, we are a local control state in that the activities and the work-based learning activities across Colorado are supported by the Department of Education and CareerWise, and districts and communities voluntarily walk through what they plan to do in their community. Excuse me. A few things about the timeline that we've been on. So really, we've been on the path of work-based learning for more than 20 years. We had a school to work initiative for $22 million under a prior governor that was started, gosh, back in the early 2000s. And really, since then, we've had lots of permissive policies around flexibility of time, flexibility of credits, because actually for the first time ever in 2013, we've established graduation guidelines, which is the first ever opportunity in Colorado that graduation expectations for all 178 school districts were established. So that was done not necessarily through a certain number of credits the students must take, but really from the lens of a bar of achievement that students need to meet to show what they know. So with that environment and those conversations that have happened over the past several years, we've seen a real spirit of innovation and permissiveness across the state, where folks can really adopt and adapt their local lens and frame on work-based learning. A few other really important milestones established by our current governor, Governor Hickenlooper, was the Business Experiential Learning Commission that was established in fall of 2015. What makes this really unique is it was established by executive order by our governor, and it's a combination of government leaders as well as business leaders from across the state that are really forward-thinking. And Gretchen will talk a little bit more about this, but Governor Hickenlooper then a little bit before that, actually, in 2015, took an entire group of business leaders, and Gretchen was on that trip to Switzerland, to really look at the model of Swiss apprenticeship and work-based learning and the broad lens that Switzerland has taken as a country on apprenticeship. So she can talk a little bit more about that, but I think it was a really great experience and shared experience to have between business and education as well as government leaders to say, how do we really look at all the opportunities on the continuum to ensure students are ready for the next step and that true blending of education and work. Gretchen, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Nope, keep rolling.
All right. So then, next slide, please. So then we look at Colorado's education system. One thing that we know is that we have a great opportunity while students are in high school to really think about having them earn a credential. So as you'll see here, 100 out of 100 students that enter high school, very few of them go through the traditional system in a traditional way, as far as then going straight on to higher education, graduating from high school, and then earning a credential in our state. So one of the things that we really want to focus on in Colorado is thinking about how do we help students get a credential of value while they're still in high school. And then we have two specific landscape items to capture in that the vast majority of high school students, right, show up, and there's not the voluntary nature of college, and the high schools and the school districts are paying for that credential and for those college courses. Next slide, please. So as we really think about the need and the blending between education and work, we know that in our state, as with many states, middle skills jobs that have an industry credential or an associate's degree are the jobs that we have the greatest gap. So there's a great need for these for this workforce here in our state, and we know that it's also helps students with on-ramps toward their next credential of value as they upskill throughout their career. So we really look at students and their skills as a progression of skills, and how do they build upon those on those skills to then get a better and better job and be greater prepared to continue to have a great paying job in our workforce. So one of the things, next slide please, that we've looked at is the Colorado landscape and Colorado's work-based learning continuum. So this isn't just limited to one type of work-based learning, but really the entire, again, continuum of that, from career exploration all the way through toward internships, pre-apprenticeships, and then apprenticeships, on-the-job trainings, and really the full-blown blended work and education experience. A few things that are important to mention is we have had a really great foundation, as was mentioned by the timeline, from a policy but also a practice perspective. So 1 in 3 Colorado high school students is taking college courses while they're in high school. So again, that's been happening for almost a decade, and that's been a great foundation to build from. Additionally, I mentioned the credential attainment goal that we have while in high school. So our Colorado goal is to double credential attainment over the next 2 years from the current credential attainment from high school students right now. So this also really speaks to the flexible time, the permissive policies, and the opportunity for students to show what they know through multiple measures versus kind of the more traditional credit-based system. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Gretchen to talk more about apprenticeship and CareerWise.
Thanks, Misti. Next slide, please. So with that strong history of not just preparatory work and capacity, but really also partnership, these departments in our state work really closely with one another and have been tightly coordinated through shared work led by the governor and also the Workforce Council in our state. The governor maintains a workforce cabinet that includes all these departments, and then the Workforce Council actually has played a really important role in facilitating practical collaboration among these agencies for a number of years. And so we benefit from all of that. And all of that together made Colorado ready to launch CareerWise Colorado, which is a unique public-private partnership in that CareerWise is a private nonprofit entity. So we don't have any legislated authority, to do anything with anyone. If you'll move to the next slide. We are this very friendly intermediary operating among all of our different partners, potential apprentices, their schools, their families, businesses, and, K-12 education as well as higher education to try and figure out what are the parameters for a youth apprenticeship that would happen while a student is in high school, or at least begin while a student is in high school, that would be so mutually beneficial to each of these different parties that we can, at some point, have a scaled system across our states. Next slide, please. So we're really working on, again, what's the incentive for everybody to want to do this? And what this slide represents is one of the incentives for business. So we learned this from the Swiss and have studied their system pretty extensively. But this is a model based on data from Switzerland about how companies invest in apprenticeship and how they benefit. And so just the quick version of this. So I can see the graphic is a little weird. I'm sorry, you guys. In slide translation, it got a little strange, but I can tell you the gist, even though these arrows are a little bit floating in space, which is that that green curve at the top is worker productivity. And not surprisingly, at the beginning of an apprenticeship, a young person, a 16-year-old working in a company in a professional role is not hugely productive. And for a little while, their costs actually exceed the productivity of the apprentice. So that gray shape that's there sits on top of the green curve and shows that actually for the first half of a 3 to 4 year apprenticeship, companies in Switzerland spend more on the money, on the apprentice rather, than the return they get in terms of productivity from the apprentice. But about halfway through a high skill 3 to 4 year apprenticeship, they break even. And then on the last half, they make money because the productivity of the apprentice exceeds the cost of continuing to both pay and train that apprentice. And so we have worked to build the costs of our model to ensure that employers in Colorado can access a similar return on investment from a cash perspective. Now, obviously, there are other incentives for employers too. To the right of this curve, you'll notice that if an employer manages to retain an apprentice, then they're not paying a search firm to find them. And they have a huge savings that happens all at once for not having to find them. They also don't have to onboard them at a full salary cost. So there are other expenses, that they can save on beyond the term of the apprenticeship. But we think it's pretty important that this be something that be cost neutral or ROI positive for employers even during the term of the apprenticeship. Next slide, please. So right now, what this looks like, and this is just very high level gist, is students spend in their junior year, which is year one on this model, about 3 days a week at school, about 2 days a week at work, and some amount of time in community college courses. Right now, the most common thing that's happened is that students have begun those courses in the summer after their junior year. There are some students who are taking courses that are concurrently meeting academic graduation requirements while also helping them build competencies relevant to the occupation they're in as an apprentice. In year two, that flips and they spend a little more time at work, a little less time in K-12. I don't know how many of you have hung out with high school seniors, but they seem to have a lot of time. And so we're taking advantage of that and giving them more work time in that third year, and also increasing the amount of time they spend in community college coursework, building skills in a theoretical sense that can then be applied on the job. In the third year, their high school requirements are done, and they're really just splitting their time between work and continued training at community colleges. Next slide, please. And this is all built so that while businesses have a positive return on investment in terms of cost and money during the program, for students, this results in them really having a larger number of both visible and viable choices at the end of their post-secondary career. If they want to go on and work as an employee in their company and their company wants them, they can go and make a living wage in a high growth potential field with an employer that they know and can have a good start with. If they want to go out on the job market, they'll be competitive for other jobs because they are well trained, have industry certificates that they've earned toward the end of their apprenticeship, and obviously 3 years of work experience. They can go and do that. If they want to go to school, they can take a lot of the college credit that they've earned and use it toward their degree. Even if they want to change directions, there are some number of credits that are guaranteed to transfer into any state school for gen ed credit. And so even if they change their mind, they will have cut the time and cost of college if that's where they want to go. And of course, they also will have the ability to earn decent money working part-time or full-time while they go to school if that's what they choose to do. And again, it's important to us as the friendly intermediary here that what this offers students is significantly beneficial so that it's attractive to them and really offering an opportunity that as a state we don't have a means of offering right now. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick view. I'm going to be very fast on the next 2 slides. These are the apprenticeship pathways and occupations that we have currently, and you can see that we are not just talking about things like advanced manufacturing. We are talking about business operations and financial services and IT and also healthcare. That's new starting this year. We have a nursing pathway. They begin with a CNA license so they can do productive work and culminate their 4-year apprenticeship with an LPN. Next slide, please. Just so you can kind of see the numbers, we are building a statewide system, but we are just at the very beginning of our effort. So our first cohort launched last fall. It started with 116 apprentices across 40 employers in those first 4 pathways as shown on the previous slide. And you can see the numbers of school partners and community partners there. This coming year, we posted another about 150 positions in our marketplace. And so we'll have a whole new batch of students entering the program this year. We've also added 20 employers, the healthcare pathway, and a number of other community partners. So just to give you a sense of where we are now, our goal is to get to 20,000 in 10 years, which is certainly ambitious. If you ask our governor, he will say we're going to have 20,000 next year, and that is false. We're not going to move that fast. We're trying to move slowly right now to really get agreement among all these different partners about the parameters that really work, so that scaling this is not something that requires a massive investment, but is something that happens because we've really built something that all of these different constituencies want to be a part of. And that's it for Colorado.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gretchen and Misti, for that thorough overview of what's going on, the great things that are going on in Colorado. So next we're going to hear from Delaware. We've got Shana Payne, who is the Director of Higher Education with the Delaware Higher Education Office, and Luke Rhine, who's the Director of Career and Technical Education and STEM Initiatives with the Delaware Department of Education. Welcome, Shana and Luke, and go ahead and take it away.
Hello, this is Shana.
Hi, this is Luke.
So we want to share, we have been partnering together on building a statewide college and career model. So we're going to share a little bit of the history of that model and what we are looking to do in our next phase. If you want to go to the next slide. But we always find it's helpful because Delaware is unique in that we are an extremely small state. So we are nestled in between Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania with under 1 million people statewide. And this slide just gives you a sense in terms of number of districts and students in our K-12 system that we are targeting in terms of services. So we have just about 150,000 students, a little bit more, in our K-12 system overall, with the majority of students being students of color and an increasing majority of those students being low income. You can move to the next slide. So really we have been framing our work from a question that every student should be able to graduate high school being able to answer this question: what are my career goals and how do my educational plans align? As we've built this model over the last 5 years, we've focused on creating the infrastructure to help students make that transition from high school into either college or career. And what we are focused on moving forward is really how do we merge those two efforts together so that as students are graduating, they understand the connection and link between those two things, and they are not being bucketed into one either college ready or career ready path. You can move to the next slide.
All right, so we'll just spend a little bit of time talking about the economy and kind of our motivating factor behind this. So we anticipate replacing about 150,000 individuals, which is 30% of our workforce in the next 6 years. That's largely due to retirement as well as an 8% kind of growth rate during that same period of time. The reason that that number is significant is because we have 150,000 kids in our education system, which helps us to direct kind of our talent development strategy, which is really twofold. So first, every single kid matters. So when we invest in schools, when we invest in our communities, we are investing in all youth so that they have the opportunity to continue their education and enter competitive employment in an in-demand industry sector. The second portion of our talent strategy is we need to recruit and upskill our existing workforce. You can jump to the next slide. All right, so our work is really divided into 5 different partners with 5 different buckets. And in terms of this presentation, I'll spend most of the time talking about how does each aspect of our strategic plan kind of focus on expanding work-based learning, and what are the roles that different partners are playing in the expansion of work-based learning at the state level. So the first, which is chaired through the Department of Education that Shana and I lead, is really looking at how work-based learning is integrated into the fabric of our K-12 system and our post-secondary system, specifically our 2-year system of higher education. So our work at the K-12 level is really around systems alignment. So we are working now to expand work-based learning coursework aligned with students' identified career pathways, so that this becomes kind of an option that students in their senior year are able to matriculate into and then have access to competitive employment related to their designated career interests. It's also something that we're focusing on from an accountability perspective. So work-based learning is now included as a state accountability metric under our ESSA plan. So it counts as a college and career ready indicator and is a value added from the school-based accountability model. That's also true. So Delaware is a state that has submitted a combined WIOA plan, which includes kind of our Perkins plan. So the ability to kind of enroll and matriculate students, particularly youth, into work-based learning coursework is also a metric that we're following through our WIOA plan. The second area, our community college system. So our state has a single community college system, which is Delaware Technical Community College. We, through a number of private grants, have created the Office of Work-Based Learning, which is a workforce intermediary that exists at our community college. The community college has representation in the city of Wilmington, which is the largest city, as well as each county in the state. The Office of Work-Based Learning is focused really on two efforts. So the first is to help school districts build capacity to scale work-based learning. And the second is to support employers to onboard youth. Now, the employer support is really twofold. So one is directly how do employers support youth as they matriculate into their organization and also generate kind of a profit margin. The second is also around working with employers to better signal employment trends and needs relative to kind of projections in the next quarter, in the next year. The third area is with the Department of Labor. So we have three efforts to expand work-based learning with the Department of Labor. So we are invested in a pre-apprenticeship model so that is directly connecting secondary programs to registered apprenticeship programs at the state level. That work will really culminate in a pre-apprenticeship credential for youth that is then transferable and accounts for the first year of a journey person's credential in a registered apprenticeship occupation. The second and third area are really focused on deep supports for youth who have barriers to high school graduation, as well as youth with disabilities. So it's targeted supports and services through our in-school youth funding, as well as funding through vocational rehabilitation to support pre-employment and transition services for youth who have barriers to high school graduation. The fourth area is particularly around coordinating finance. So in terms of work related to expansion of work-based learning, the Rodell Foundation just received a $3.25 million grant from Bloomberg Philanthropies to help us expand our capacity to support schools relative to work-based learning. So that includes expanding the Office of Work-Based Learning at Del Tech. It also will create a series of industry groups that do not have formed industry associations as a signaling routine with our education and training providers, and we refer to those as industry councils. The United Way of Delaware plays into the work-based learning. They are a single statewide United Way. We're working with that organization to help build the capacity of community-based organizations, particularly Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCAs, other nonprofits that support youth up and down the state to offer and expand work-based learning in the out-of-school space as well. And then lastly, our Workforce Development Board. So we are a state that has a single Workforce Development Board, which seems to be the theme of our little run. We use our Workforce Development Board to as both a reporting function. So our progress is reported annually to both, or biannually to both the Workforce Development Board and our State Board of Education. We also use members of our Workforce Development Board as ambassadors of this effort. So specifically, we use members of the Workforce Development Board to then work at our State Chamber of Commerce, our local chambers of commerce, our local rotaries to increase that membership and their participation in sponsoring youth work-based learning experiences at the local and community level. And you can jump to the next slide. This is really kind of our logic model. Education, experience, and the right support equals opportunity for youth. Our values are equal in each of these three areas. We can jump to the next slide. All right.
So one of our focus areas, in addition to building the infrastructure that Luke reference, is to look at readiness. And so we have been diving deep into understanding what is our readiness, what are our students' readiness when they exit our high school, our K-12 system. And one way of looking at that is the level of students who require remedial courses when they get to college. So on the left side, you'll see a graphic that shows that of our students who are graduating high school and entering one of our in-state colleges, whether public or private, 41% of those students overall require at least one remedial course. This is for the class of 2015. We also have been able to break that down by various groups of students so you can see how certain groups of students are impacted much more heavily than their peers relative to the statewide number. So, for example, African American students have a remediation rate of about 54% compared to their Caucasian peers of 34%. So we have formed a number of committees to look at remediation by subject area, to create partnerships between our higher ed and our high schools to be able to dive deeper and understand what are the root causes of this and how can we begin to tackle those issues. What we also have been able to do, all of our juniors take the school day SAT. And so we have been able to measure for several years college readiness utilizing the SAT. So for this past, the current graduating class, 25% of those students met the college readiness benchmark on the SAT in both math and reading. And for on the career ready side, we look at number of students who are completing an industry recognized credential upon graduation, and about 24% of our graduating senior class met that benchmark. There is duplication between those numbers, so there are students who met both of those metrics, and our goal is to increase that significantly over the coming years. You can go to the next slide. And so as we've been looking at what does it take to get ready for college, we have focused primarily on building the transition supports at the 12th grade level. So we have a statewide college application month where all of our colleges waive the college application fees and volunteer to support our high schools in helping students to apply to college. We have FAFSA completion, and I am very proud to say that we are now 4th in the nation in FAFSA completion, and we're knocking at the door on the other 3 states. And then we also have Decision Day, where students are able to celebrate with their peers what their next steps will be after high school. We have been ramping up funding for increasing student participation in dual enrollment courses, both on the academic and the career side, as well as advanced placement courses, and getting more students, increasing access. We provide a waiver statewide for students who are low income taking AP exams so that that's no longer a barrier for them. And we were able to continue that once the federal funds for that were eliminated. And I already spoke about the remediation effort in terms of the subcommittees, but we've also put in place the 2 transition courses, one for math and one for English, where students can take courses in high school to get them off of the path towards remediation on path to be ready for credit-bearing courses, and our colleges accept those courses in lieu of placement tests. You can also, if you want to look at our annual report on statewide remediation, the link is included there at the bottom. You can move to the next slide. So as we think about what the next phase is, most of our work has been about infrastructure and focusing on what the end result needs to be for students making the transition. Our next phase is really focused on what needs to be in place 7 through 14 for students to help them prepare for that 12th grade to post-secondary transition. So we have 3 key areas that we're focusing in on and building out an advisement model to support students. One is providing a statewide advisory curriculum that's focused not just on college readiness, but connecting college and career together for students and helping them to explore those options. Work-based learning, as Luke described, building out that infrastructure so that students are able to do both career exploration and awareness and preparation while in middle school and high school. And then professional learning, recognizing that there's a significant amount of knowledge that the adults engaging with students need to be able to support this model. So building out a robust professional learning model for teachers, counselors, and community organizations. Underlying all of this work, we have a couple of foundational principles. One is that it's being driven by students, parents, and schools. So we are actively engaging them through various focus groups to be able to understand what their needs are and incorporate that into the model design itself. We are integrating the work that's happening that Luke just described in terms of pathways in this advisement model so that college and career are intentionally connected. We are building infrastructure to support the partnerships between our higher ed institutions, our community organizations, and our schools, recognizing that often they want to work together but don't know how to do that. So we're trying to build the capacity and be a liaison for them, and then increase capacity through staff to support that.
You could advance the slide. I think that's it. If you have any questions, our contact information is here. Love to follow up with you.
All right. Thank you so much, Luke and Shana, for that overview of what is happening in Delaware. Next, we're going to hear from two presenters who bring possibly a slightly different perspective. A presenter with a background in Kentucky who brings a national perspective, Terry Holliday, who is retired Commissioner of Education for Kentucky and representing employer-led workforce systems in the state of Kentucky, Kim Menke, who is with Toyota Motors North America Government Affairs. So thank you for being with us, Terry and Kim. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much for this time together. If we go to the next slide, I'll kind of give an overview, and Kim will go into detail about the exciting work of the Kentucky FAME and the Toyota model. Back in 2009, Kentucky, like every other state we've heard from, was very concerned that high school grads were neither prepared for college nor career, or both. As a matter of fact, at the time, we were able to clearly define academic readiness for college and academic and technical readiness for careers that would pay a living wage. And the percentage we had at the time was about 30% of our graduates were prepared. By the end of 2015, that number had risen to 67%. What was very helpful was this legislation in 2009 and the career readiness legislation that had developed over the period of time from 2002 all the way to 2015. The career ready legislation certainly included things like four-year career plans, counseling, credentialing, dual enrollment, dual credit, a multitude of things. Perhaps one of the biggest levers that happened was the No Child Left Behind waiver. We moved from a focus just on 3 through 8 math and reading to a focus on college and career readiness. We were able to, as I said before, clearly define the academic and the career measures that we would use, and we later added military readiness also. An interesting thing arose out of some of our legislation around 2014. We were, just like every other state, challenged with barriers to equity of access. Our rural communities didn't always have, work-based learning access, business community access, business engagement. So Kentucky began with support from the General Assembly with funding grants of $250,000 for planning. They began the Kentucky Academies model, which began to require community college, business, and K-12 involvement, and in rural areas, the involvement of multiple districts with multiple district agreements. And these programs began as early as the 9th grade and are growing each year. And it is a way to share resources, to access the equity, overcome barriers like workman's comp liability through the use of intermediaries. A lot of this we learned through some of our early work-based learning models, the Toyota model that Kim will talk about. Kentucky was well recognized very early in the work-based learning work with this excellent model. We began to develop pre-apprenticeships through our track model, tech-ready apprenticeships for careers in Kentucky, and we started that with an automotive company that was out of Germany, Dr. Snyder's group. And that model has grown, that you're able to give kids these experiences in high school that then move into pre-apprenticeships that then move into registered apprenticeships, very similar to a lot of the great work going on in Colorado. Other groups that came along and offered similar models to the Toyota model were Ford. Certainly UPS was even before that in Louisville. And Kim will give you great details about the advanced manufacturing model called Kentucky FAME. If I could shift a little bit to the national perspective that I've been working on since my retirement, if we could go to the next slide. Very early in the No Child Left Behind waiver era, we had a couple of states, I'll just call out two of them, Kentucky's model and the Louisiana Jumpstart model that you heard about yesterday, were early models of career readiness. And the latest research I've done with the ESSA Every Student Succeeds Act model, we now have over 35 states with some measure of career readiness in their ESSA accountability models. Most of these models include some type of work-based learning, credits around apprenticeships, internships, credentials, very wide menu of offerings there in state ESSA plans. Back in 2014, when I was chair of the Council of Chief State School Officers, we put together a task force to address the issues around career readiness, and there were three major recommendations. One, more employer engagement. Two, more quality defined pathways. Delaware is certainly a great model of those defined pathways. And the third was that more states include work-based learning and career readiness in their accountability models. And so it's been a huge success since 2014, with well over 40 states being involved in that work in some way. The report that came out of that is still available through the Council of Chief State School Officers. It's called Opportunities and Options, Making Career Preparation Work for Students. Also, during this time, we saw tremendous growth across the nation with Jobs for the Future and their Pathways to Prosperity, the work out of Harvard that Bob and Nancy Schwartz and others have been involved in. We've also seen growth out of Arizona State. Bill Simons has been doing a lot of work and has a conference coming up on career readiness. We were lucky to have international support from J.P. Morgan Chase and their New Skills for Youth grants. You featured several of the states. The 10 states currently have implementation grants. You featured Delaware and Kentucky and Louisiana and others, Tennessee, Ohio, Wisconsin. 10 states currently have those grants. Tremendous resource I want to make sure everyone knows about, that you can find many of the reports around work-based learning and other career-ready issues is Advanced CTE. They have a Learning That Works Resource Center, and their webpage is easy to get to. It's called careertech.org. And finally, the Council of Chief State School Officers is launching a nationwide career readiness network for states that want to continue this work and collaborate and learn from each other. It's very exciting to hear about all the great work going on in the states, that not everybody's headed toward a 4-year or professional type of diploma. We should value all post-secondary credentials, including 1-year credentials, 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees, and certainly post-secondary degrees, all to better prepare our workforce for the future. So I turn it over to Kim for more details on the Kentucky, the Toyota model.
Great. Thank you, Terry. It's great to work with you again. Hi, folks. If you want to go ahead and advance the slide one more time there. One of the things that we've always worked on from a Toyota perspective, from a business perspective, is we have to change. You know, change is just part of it, and we need to utilize all of our resources from a local, state, and federal perspective, and come together and figure out how do we make things better. You know, from a Toyota perspective, it's all about continuous improvement. So we all recognize that we needed to change to get what we need to be productive. And so I want to talk about two things very quickly today. One is the Kentucky FAME model that Terry mentioned, and then a second program that builds on that takes it yet to the next level is our Kentucky Workforce Center. And basically it's about how do you bring all the stakeholders from education, government, and business together to be able to use all the resources that we have. So if you go ahead and advance the slide there, and we'll talk about what, you know, FAME is. It's a weird name, Kentucky Federation for Advanced Manufacturing Education. And basically it's an industry-led public-private partnership that implements what we feel is the world-class model for developing manufacturing talent. So we were very selfishly looking at it from a manufacturing perspective, not just Toyota, but a manufacturing. And we went out and we looked at all the great models that were out there, the benchmarks that are out there, and many that have been talked about today. But the whole idea was to go through the problem-solving process, to be able to provide something that provides those critical skills that are necessary, that is driven by the marketplace in terms of the careers that are necessary, that we're able to deliver this from a standardization perspective, and be able to provide this meaningful work experience as part of the education experience of lifelong learning as we continue to change. And, you know, one of the other things that we were really bad at in manufacturing is telling our own story, that there are really great careers in manufacturing that cover the gamut, and we need to be recruiting the next generation of employees because of the inverted pyramid of population. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So basically, Kentucky Fame, this is something that's been evolving over the last 20 years, coinciding with a partnership that actually developed in 2009, about 9 years ago, where we actually started this collaborative and did a cohort with one of our education partners here in Central Kentucky, the Bluegrass Community and Technical College. And we actually started and kicked off that program in 2010, and were able to prove out that program that was successful in developing that world-class talent. And so in 2015, we started looking with the government folks and education folks that recognizing from an economic development perspective, workforce was what we really needed to focus on. And so the governor, Beshear at the time, here in Kentucky, along with our economic development folks, decided we want to be able to duplicate this model in Central Kentucky and spread it out so everybody has the opportunity. So we developed a statewide board to do that. And at that point in time, we've got now 200 companies and sponsoring over 650 students. Next slide, please. So what is it? So basically, it's a learn and earn model. In a nutshell, it's a 2-year program where you actually get an associate degree program. But it's all centered around the experience of work. So you work in a mentoring company that hires you 3 days a week. 2 days a week, you go to school, but it's in a simulated workplace environment. And it's not just go to 2 classes and then go home. It's an 8-hour day. And then at night, then you're expected to go home and study on top of that. And so it's truly identifying what the world of work is all about, utilizing our Kentucky Community and Technical College system and the pathway that's set up there. Next slide, please. So what's really unique about this is when we looked at what were the real gaps, you know, technical skills were fine. You know, we could find folks that knew electricity. This is for a multi-skilled maintenance type person because all manufacturers need them. And so technical skill was fine, but the 2 areas that we were finding were really lacking were in areas where we call, you know, personal behaviors or essential skills, you know, being able to come to work on time, be able to communicate, be able to interact with folks, work in a team, and stay drug-free. And then the third component was what we're calling manufacturing core exercises or competencies or just the culture of manufacturing. Things like safety, workplace organization, lean manufacturing, and the really big one is problem solving, being able to think on your feet and be able to really function utilizing all the skill sets that you have available to you. Next slide, please. So basically, Fame has been growing, and you can see the little dots across the state of Kentucky there. We actually have 10 chapters, over 200 companies, and to date, we have 232 graduates. And this fall, we'll have over 800 students just in the state of Kentucky that are enrolled in this program across the state. and across a wide variety of manufacturing type of companies. Next slide, please. So this isn't just a Kentucky thing, you know, since from a Toyota perspective, we actually started this program with a couple other companies here locally, and we've spread it to our other Toyota manufacturing operations that we have in 8 states in the US. And so we have 8 programs connected to 22 different colleges across that area that you see the dots on. So there are 10 states that are actually connected. You see the list there on the right. The bottom 2, Arkansas and Louisiana, are the only 2 states where we don't have a Toyota operation. And so it's growing well beyond anything that's connected with Toyota as well. Next slide, please. The key point behind this is, and this is, I think, the connection of this activity is, it's all about a talent pipeline. And so again, trying to look at how do we prepare students and make sure that they have the right skill sets to be able to do these advanced manufacturing types of things. We've searched out a lot of different programs, benchmarked a lot of programs. Project Lead the Way is one of our partners that we have aligned ourselves with because of the programs that they have, first starting in the high schools, but now we've been working with them to be able to take it down into the elementary and middle school. So basically, there's this program of being able to have the talent pipeline, to have the right STEM-focused activities that are project-based, moving into as a feeder into our Payne program. And then you see the various sponsoring companies that work as a cohort that support these students at their places of work as well. Next slide, please. The other thing that's unique about this program, it's not just about high school graduates, but it's also about displaced workers or incumbent workers that need to be able, they've got a lot more potential, but they need some additional training. So we have a lot of companies that actually put their own employees into the program, and this cohort of students basically produce a much better product when you have that diversification of the program. But the big benefits is employment, basically zero debt coming out of this program, the work experience, as well as the program themselves. And they can go into employment, business, or even engineering. If you go to the next slide, I'll explain that a little bit further. I know this is very, very busy, but basically the message here is, if you look at the bottom of the flow chart there, you've got the K through 12 system, Project Lead the Way, and K through 12 system going into the AMT program. Then they could go on and be multi-skilled maintenance type technicians, or we also have a business program where they can actually do a very similar learn and earn program in a manufacturing focused business area where they can get their bachelor's and master's MBA in manufacturing as well. If you go over to the far right, we actually have an engineering component where we've found that folks that have this type of hands-on experience become some of the best engineers. And so we have an agreement with a couple of the different engineering schools here in Kentucky that allow this earn and learn program and provides them opportunities to go into engineering as well. So it just gives them several options to be able to have career pathways. Next slide, please. So the next program I want to talk about just very quickly is our Kentucky Workforce Center, because it adds to the program. Go to the next slide, please. And basically, it provides the next level, talent pipeline management system. Next slide, please. And basically what that means is we're looking at training as a supply chain that we would look at from a manufacturing perspective. If you look at the top bar there, you know, you'd have raw materials that come into a manufacturing operation that then develops a product that's sold to a customer. Well, you've got a very similar system, and we'll have to look at being able to do that with a student as well, working with providers and supporting. And so we've got a network that's going to do that. Next slide, please. So we're implementing this in right now we've got 65 communities engaged in the program, over 1,000 employees that are plugging their supply or their demand data into the system. Next slide, and we'll finish up. And basically what we're doing is we're going to take the manufacturing FAME model and duplicate that across other industry sectors: healthcare, technology and business services, construction and logistics, very similar to other presenters. So final slide. Basically, it's all about how do you get along and how do you bring the stakeholders together to be able to make it happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Terry and Kim, for this great overview of what's going on in your state and these programs. Next, we are going to hear from the great state of Washington, my state, from Marc Casale, who is founder and CEO of Kinetic West, sorry about that, Marc, who is a leader for our Career Connect Washington work. So take her away, Marc.
Yeah, hi everybody. It feels a bit like a home game here, being on a Washington Career Connect Washington team, and there's a lot of folks involved in the initiative on the line. So I will, with permission, speak for you all. So as was mentioned, my name is Marc Casale. I work for a social impact consulting firm called Kinetic West, and I'm supporting Career Connect Washington, the governor-led initiative here to create a statewide career connected learning system. So we can move on to the next slide there. So we have a bit of an exciting and unique opportunity here in Washington, in the sense that over the last few years we've seen dramatic, state GDP growth. We have one of the fastest growing economies in the nation, and yet I think the challenge we face is that too many of our students and our young people are kept out of that opportunity that's created from our booming economy. So you can see here we have our GDP growth along the top, and then we have our youth unemployment rate here, which is almost twice the rate, or it's over twice the rate of our adult unemployment rate. And we know this is, that's not where it needs to be, and above the national averages, and certainly above exemplar countries like Switzerland, who we base some of our analysis on. Next slide, please. Another way to look at this, we know that by 2030, our economy is going to require that 70% of our students have attained some kind of post-secondary credential. And this has been a goal adopted by our state at many levels. And we know today that only 31% of students are achieving that goal. And so a lot of work to do to make sure that our young people, our students, have the ability to participate in the economy that's being created in our state. Next slide. I'll keep talking, but next slide when you have the ability to advance the presentation. So we're here in Washington working to create a statewide system. And a couple things to mention here. By no means are we implying that career connected learning hasn't been going on in Washington for a number of years now. In fact, I would argue that we have one of the strongest heritages of career connected learning. We have a large registered apprenticeship system. But what we've lacked in the past, we've been sort of program rich in some ways and maybe systems poor. And so the work that the governor is on task to do here, has tasked us with, is how can we create a system? So our inspiration for the work that we're doing is the Swiss system has been brought up. And I think obviously we're not trying to create a Swiss model as a clone in Washington State, but there are a few things we really like about this model. One is, as one of the commenters mentioned in the chat, career exploration starts very early in the Swiss system. And so we imagine a career connected learning system that begins early and exposes students to career early in their experience, so they have the ability to make choices down the road. 70% of students participate in apprenticeships in the Swiss system. We don't think that's necessarily the model we'll have in Washington, but we do aspire that every student has the ability to participate in some kind of career connected learning. And so we like the comprehensiveness of that system. And then the fact that this system is fully permeable, that if you choose to make different decisions at points in your academic career. If you decide to go down more of a vocational path, you can pivot to a more traditional academic path and vice versa. So these are design principles that we like in the Swiss system that we want to see replicated here in Washington. Next slide is great. So here's the work to be done. I didn't mention this up front, but the work we're doing now is to create a plan for a system. And it's due by October, so I don't like this slide because this is all the work that I have to do, or that we have to do to get there. So the goal here will be to build a 10-year vision, detailed system design and growth plan, work out the funding model, governance, and then engagement and comp. So, super simple. We got this fully under control by October. This is the work to be done here. Next slide. Okay, so I'll share a few just updates on some of the work that we're doing. As I said, we're really underway here, so it's by no means big, but I do want to share with you guys our vision and then how we're thinking of the continuum of career-connected learning experiences. So here's our vision for career-connected learning in Washington, and I'll just read it to you all. Every young adult in Washington will have multiple pathways towards economic self-sufficiency, strengthened by a comprehensive statewide system for career-connected learning. I know it seems simple, and certainly it's not the work, but without a vision, it's tough to move forward. And trust that these words were agonized over and debated for probably way too long. So that's our vision. We'll go to the next slide here. And then here's how we've chosen to define the continuum of career-connected learning here. And again, building off the work of many folks in our state. The bottom of this pyramid, and we sort of changed it to steps in future versions because we want to talk about how permeable it is career awareness and exploration. And the point here is to give early exposure to career options for students, and then help them deep dive into different specific, careers along the way. And this is really just the building blocks, the preparation to make decisions, later on about their pathways. And so this could be things like work-based learning opportunities. This could be worksite tours, job shadowing, things like that. And then as we move up, career preparation is where you actually begin to gain education or work-based experiences that build these hands-on skills and knowledge and prepare you to be hired and successful in the workforce. So this is where things like comprehensive internships come in, pre-apprenticeship programs, CTE coursework. And then career launch is the top of the pyramid. And this is a concept we're working on. It's similar in a lot of ways to some of the programs that have already been mentioned on the call today, but it's really a program that combines meaningful on-the-job experience with relevant classroom learning and then results in a competitive candidate, so someone who's either on the job already or ready to be hired, and then a relevant credential beyond high school. And this is really our sort of the pinnacle of our continuum of career-connected learning experiences that will set you up for a future of lifelong learning and work. Next slide here. And so these are just a few specific examples of some of the concepts I was talking about before, just to help illustrate what we're talking about. And maybe the only thing that I'll point out here is and speak to kind of how we're thinking about the design of the system, is that we would consider, at the top of this pyramid in career launch, of course, things you might expect like registered apprenticeships and youth apprenticeships is something we have sort of a strong heritage of here in Washington. Our CTE programs that have work-based learning components are CTC programs that have work-based learning components. But we'd also include our four-year programs in here as well if they have a work-based learning program that is robust. And so this is really a vision for our entire education system and not just something for a small subset of the population. And I think I can I know we're kind of over time, so I think I can pretty much conclude here. Maybe just the next step slides here at the end, just to give folks a sense for where we're going. Maybe one more down, one more after that. These are just some metrics. I'm kind of speeding up for time here. Last slide here. Yep. So like I said, we have we're about halfway through our planning process. We have a large meeting with the governor to share some of this work in June, which we're very excited about. And then we'll be concluding the planning phase in October. And so we'll keep you all updated on where we end up here. And again, just to say thanks to everyone else on the phone for your inspiration. We built many of our ideas here based on programs from other states. And then to my colleagues here in Washington, we're building off a really great bedrock of career-connected learning here and just trying to help create a statewide system that empowers you all. So that will be it for my comments and look forward to questions.
All right, thank you, Marc. And, as Marc said, appreciate everybody just sharing so we can all learn from each other here. So we're going to go into a time of discussion. I know we're a little bit shorter on time than we had hoped, but it's been so meaningful that I don't want to apologize too much for that. But we might not get to every question that we were going to, and because I also do want to try to get to some of our participants' questions. I think there's been some good questions if you're following along on the chat box, as well as some great responses too. So if you're not tuned into that, tune into that. And if you're on the phone, make sure to follow up later with the resources on the website. So the topics of our discussion, we're going to talk about our equitable access to opportunities. I might skip the interagency coordination because I think we've heard pretty deliberately about that in our states. But then discuss alignment with graduation requirements and post-secondary pathways, as well as indicators of success and employer engagement. So let's start with our first question for discussion. How do you in your state address equitable access to these work-based learning opportunities? And I'm just going to leave this kind of open-ended. So whoever would like to jump in, please do. Or I can call on you. What about Luke and Shana from Delaware? Would you like to start off with this discussion topic?
Sorry, yes, we had to come off of mute. Sure, so I'll start and Luke, feel free to chime in. So we are looking at this through a couple of different lenses. One, in terms of identifying allocation of resources. So as we build out various programs, recognizing that different schools have access to more resources than others, and wanting to make sure that students' access to their necessary resources are not determined based on which school or zip code they live in. So we provide a number of resources at the state level so that all schools and all students have access to those to try to eliminate those barriers. We also then look to see where there might need to be some flexibility to provide funding to schools. So for example, with our dual enrollment program, our colleges have been able to provide a very affordable funding model, and then we are able to provide reimbursement for their low-income students who are taking those courses. So it's not specific to every single school, but to address a targeted population of students. So we try to apply that reasoning as we build out all of our programs to eliminate those barriers, and then also looking to utilize data to better understand where performance or student outcomes vary widely across various student groups, and how we can start to tweak and address our programming.
Yep. And then just one very specific example is we provide targeted supports and funding. So an example is we use our in-school WIOA funds to support what we refer to as our promise communities. So there are 8 communities in the state of Delaware that have the highest percentage of low-income population in the state. So the anticipation is that in-school youth providers work with schools directly to support students in career pathways and then matriculate into work placements and work-based learning experiences, whether that's during the school day or after school or in the evening or even over the summer months. So it's kind of a nice way to braid both state and federal resources aligned with areas of high concentration of poverty to ensure that all youth have the supports they need to be successful in advanced coursework and work-based learning experiences.
Great. Any other states want to jump in here? Because I know we've talked a lot about that in our state too, where we have, urban areas that have different access to resources and opportunities versus our rural areas, as well as, like you said, students that maybe are lower income might not have transportation needs, or transportation resources to get to these opportunities. So I think it's a great question to see how states are wrestling with us. Colorado, do you want to jump in there?
Sure, I can take that. I got some feedback. Is everything okay on the sound?
I think you're okay. I think I just unmuted myself at the same time maybe, but keep going.
Okay. So one of the things in our strategic plan is to really think about how we honor all pathways and leverage technology more effectively. So as you probably know, Colorado is a fairly rural state, and much of our population is near and around Denver with some other population centers, but that's where the majority of our state is physically located. So we're really thinking about how do we deeply ensure that at least 3 pathways are available to all students across the state. That's really something that we're just digging into now. So if there's other recommendations about how other states have done this well, we're really looking at honor in all pathways equitably. So saying multiple pathways offers more opportunity and greater opportunity for students, and thinking about, what we're bumping into is most of our districts right now offer 2 or more, and so we're really thinking and focusing on expansion, but also quality of expansion. So for example, if they're offering advanced placement, can we help them expand on that through concurrent enrollment, which really isn't a heavy lift, we're finding, even for some of our smallest rural districts with just a few hundred students.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Hey,
Gretchen,
MJ,
did you want to add?
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
jump in there. Was that Terry?
I can. Yeah, this is Gretchen. In the apprenticeship itself, as you saw right now, there are a relatively small number of total opportunities as we work to get this system built and running with employers as well as schools. But it is a wide open marketplace, and we work with our schools to make sure they're recruiting a really wide range of students to participate in ways that you can find in demographic data, but also things you can't find, like what are teachers' conceptions about whether this kid is on a college track or not. Want to make sure that a wide range of kids in those kinds of dimensions are also invited and supported in getting ready. And a number of our school partners provide significantly differentiated supports to kids to be ready for the process of job application and interview. If that isn't something where they have a lot of familiarity, or if students might encounter significant cultural differences as they encounter the hiring managers inside these workplaces. So there's a lot of that support that goes on. And the good news is a lot of our companies are really interested in having youth apprentices because they are seeking to diversify their workforce for all kinds of different reasons. And so far, I don't have the data on our second marketplace yet, but in our first year of marketplace of employers hiring students, we ended up with a group of students that was pretty representative of the district that the students came from, and getting a pretty diverse group of kids. So far that is working, but we continue to monitor it really closely.
Great. Data is so important. I think Kentucky, was that Terry or Kim that was going to jump in?
Yeah, this is Kim. So one of the things that we undertook from a state workforce board perspective, we started last year and we're kind of wrapping it up this year, is we partnered with the folks from education, and we took a hard look at line item by line item of all the different CTE programs, all the various offerings that they had across the state in the K through 12 system. And basically about 2/3 of them were so outdated, but they were still on the books. They were still talking with folks about those, and as if they were relevant for today. And so we were able to partner and go in and cull that list. And now we're in the process of being able to now identify which folks we have, which manufacturers, which business folks are able to support what programs. And we too have the urban versus rural issue. Where in the major cities, it's fairly easy, but mostly a rural state. But we took the approach of trying to get rid of all the outdated stuff to bring everything back up to par.
Perfect. Great. Thank you for those responses. So, and like I mentioned, I think we're going to skip the second question that we'd sent out to our panelists. We're going to go to the third one, which talks about how do you align the work-based learning opportunities with high school graduation requirements and post-secondary pathways? Who would like to start on that discussion?
This is Terry Holliday, and I've studied this nationwide. One of the only programs that requires a industry credential for graduation is Louisiana. Several other states provide incentives in graduation. In other words, a tiered incentive. You get more points if kids are both college and career ready. So those seem to be the biggest promotions out there. In Kentucky, what we had done is we gave equal credit to kids who reached academic college readiness and who reached academic/technical career readiness. The career readiness was actually a little more difficult pathway because you had to reach academic and technical. The big challenge in the graduation requirements is the equity and access. Louisiana is finding that if rural areas may not have as much access to industry-based credentials required under the Jumpstart program as other areas, but working on improving that access. But that is a huge growth area, graduation requirements that many states be looking at through their ESSA plans.
Great.
This is Misti from Colorado, just to add one thing to exactly what Terry said, in that Colorado is looking at it just a little bit differently in that there are incentives, so actual monetary incentives offered for every credential earned by students in a high need area of industry across our state. So really looking at it as seed dollars for those programs to grow, and we're really looking at rural districts extensively in that being resources they can use to expand their programs as well, and including apprenticeship.
And so where do those funds come from? I'd be curious.
So that's state general funds.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's something to look into. All right.
This is Gretchen. One thing I'd add for Colorado, and this is specific to what we're doing at CareerWise, but there are a lot of other efforts that align with this too, which is to try and make competency become the sort of currency for issuing credit in all these different environments. And so for us specifically, that has to do with working with employers to identify the set of competencies a youth apprentice must build over the term of their apprenticeship to be qualified as a professional in that function at the end. And then working with our education partners to have them first figure out what kinds of training supports they have that could help students build those competencies, but also what are the mechanisms they have for having those competencies validated, and having competency validation become a basis for credit accumulation rather than seat time or course completion in the traditional sense. And I do think for all states interested in expanding work-based learning and trying to gain efficiency in terms of a young person's time working across a work-based learning situation and a school situation, that whether that be in K-12 higher ed or both, competency-based, I think, is going to be one of the things that we need to figure out to make it be time efficient for a student to have their learning recognized, validated, and valued by those different institutions to sort of please each of the requirements that they have in those systems.
Yep. So this is Luke from Delaware. The only thing I would add, and I agree with Gretchen's comments completely as well as Terry's, as far as our expansion of work-based learning, one of the things that we are doing with our post-secondary institutions is really looking at policy around credit for prior learning, so that we kind of design kind of our portfolio requirements, different things like that, for kind of a competency-based evaluation of work-based learning courses or career immersion courses. You know, we would really like to work with our IHEs around how we evaluate that work under their kind of credit for prior learning policy. So again, it becomes in and of itself a credential that a student can take with them to pursue competitive employment or continue their education.
And that's great, Luke, and I appreciate that because you actually answered a question that we have from one of our participants that I was just going to sneak in here that asked that exact question. Do any states offer work-based learning as a dual credit option that would count toward completion of a 2-year degree or 4-year degree? So I think you definitely answered, you know, that in some way. Any other input or feedback on that from other states or more from Delaware? And that question is in the chat box too. I kind of threw that out there on you.
This is Gretchen.
This is Marc.
Oh, go ahead.
I would say it's Marc from Washington, and would definitely have flexibility like that built into some of our systems today that enable that. And we think it's essential to Gretchen's point of just efficiency. I mean, if students are demonstrating that they're capable of, you know, doing the work, and they should be given credit for that, both if fulfills their high school graduation requirements and gives them a jump start on post-secondary. So, you know, it's not a blank slate, but there are options there. And just to add a note, I mean, we're kind of in the beginning phases of this system design work, but we've done a fair amount of focus grouping with parents, and this piece is really essential. college and the idea of a college degree is seen as, such a transformational kind of intergenerational goal for many folks, and they want their students to be able to avail themselves of that option. Now, they also want their students to be prepared for work, but it can't be an either or. And so finding ways to make sure that while we're giving students this great career prep, that they're also taking care of some of their credential requirements and high school graduation requirements, it's essential, and we're just building it in as a design principle to our system that folks need both.
So this is Gretchen, and I had a private chat with Randall, who posted this question earlier, so I'll just say these two things out loud, which is that we have found two really useful entry points to this, competency-based learning being like a bigger thing, but two very tactical things are finding a higher ed partner in the space who is really innovation-oriented. For us, that's CSU Global, which is a statewide public online university, who has very strong mission and goals around program completion, and their disposition therefore is different on some of these issues. And then the second thing is using mechanisms that already exist for prior learning assessment, usually currently taken advantage of as people try to bring military veterans into their institutions, but there's a lot of other opportunity there as well. And again, it's about finding a higher ed partner who's willing to use some of those existing mechanisms in ways that can help make this more competency-based and more time efficient.
Okay, awesome. And just a reminder to our participants too, if you're not one of the panelists, I would advise that you mute, because we're getting a little bit of feedback there and it makes it hard to hear. Thank you. So let's jump to this question around indicators of measures of success. What are your indicators or measures of success, and how will your state express value in this work? We've talked about this a little bit, but I'd like to kind of go more in depth. Will these indicators be used as local, state, and or federal system measures, like for the ESSA plan, in a cycle of review and continuous improvement? Would somebody like to start us off there? Terry, do you want to? I know you talked a little bit about the ESSA plan.
Yeah, I would jump up another level. I would look, most states are looking at their Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act goals and measures, and the biggest measure is, are we actually closing the skills gap with our top 5 or 6 industries? If you look at the Kentucky Payne model, you'll see that actually wanting to close the skills gap with the number of job openings they have and the people who are able to fill those jobs. I think that talent management pipeline that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce talks about, those give good measures. The greater Louisville area, Louisville Works, they had a scoreboard that they put out every year that would include measures like kids enrolled in pathways that actually were linked to the WIOA top 5 industries, kids completing those pathways, equitable access to those pathways, work-based learning opportunities and completed. So you got to look beyond just enrollment. You got to look at actual successful outcomes, because all of this will be for nothing if we don't eventually close the skills gap and the employability gap.
This is Kim. I just wanted to add one quick point to Terry's comment there. From a FAME perspective, one of the things is demonstrated competency. And so their mentors at their sponsoring companies have a scorecard that they do every week, and they share that with their instructors, and they have a scorecard that they're doing as well. And so if there's somebody that's not getting it, both parties know it, and we can provide the necessary remediation or additional support to be able to get there. The other quick point is we from an essential skills or personal behaviors perspective, that's one of the areas that we feel the most strongly about, that those have to be demonstrated activities, because if they don't practice them, they're never going to get them. And so just being able to watch something on a computer and say, yes, I took that class, doesn't really get it. And so we're continuing to push from a state perspective, demonstrated competency in those essential skills. And we actually passed a bill, although it was a little bit watered down. We just passed a bill this year in the state legislature requiring that.
Yeah, and this is Luke. The only thing I would add here is, I mean, states should be really working to align their Perkins, WIOA, and their ESSA plans so that there is kind of a common set of expectations across both education and training providers, you know, really at the highest level. The other thing that I would say is necessary for this work is short-term interim reporting. So making sure that your state board of education, your workforce board, your executive branch, state government are all informed in a way that allows those individual bodies to be additive to the work, while also signaling, you know, potential struggles and challenges that your interagency coordinated group is working to resolve. It's important to signal success as well as it is to signal kind of state challenges so that you are soliciting support and cover from other parties to help you address those barriers. So in our example, we do a biannual report to our Workforce Development Board, our State Board of Education, and then we do quarterly reports to our governor's office around this work, and all of that's kind of signaled through our cabinet agencies and branch.
Well, that's great. Well, I appreciate those responses. Very robust and helps give us some great tips and tools to use in our own states. I know we've got, like, we're just basically out of time. I just want to give maybe Marc an opportunity to answer the last question. How are employers engaged in this work? Marc, do you want to share?
Yeah. I'll answer briefly, given time. I just think that it's been essential to us here in Washington, and part of you know, what we sort of realized in the system work was that without employers being on board, there really was no career connected learning. And it sounds obvious, but I think it's important that we acknowledge that. And so in our plan design, we actually have a body of employers with, you know, CEOs of every major industry in Washington who are serving as an advisory council to help us shape the plan. We keep them in the loop, and they give us actionable feedback. And so when we present this plan to the governor, it will be, it'll obviously be shaped by, you know, his cabinet and our government and education and labor partners, but it will also be approved by the business community. And so we won't have to then go take this plan and sell it to the business community. They'll have actually created it, and we think that will help create a bunch of tailwinds for us when we then go and try to create more of these career launch programs. We'll essentially just be kind of calling in on the commitments that these employers made baked into the plan. So we just can't stress enough from our experience here in Washington how important it is to have employers, you know, in the design process so they feel like they own it and it's something that's not happening to them.
Yep. Absolutely. And apologize for not having more time for our other states to respond. Like we said, what we'll do is we didn't get to all the questions as well. Great questions in our chat box, but we will get those to our panelists so they can respond, and also to this last question if anybody else wanted to respond since we ran out of time. But that completes our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks again to our panelists from Colorado, Gretchen and Misti, from Delaware, Shana and Luke, from Kentucky, Terry and Kim, and from Washington State, Marc, and as well as Randy and Robert Hull from NASBE. We did record this recording, and it will be available along with the additional information at the Washington State Board of Education website. I do believe that they're going to post that link. Oh, it's right there. You can see that there on the webinar. If you have any questions that we didn't get to, you can send them to Linda Drake. Her email address is right there, and we will forward those as well to the panelists, and we'll post the answers on our website. Thank you again so much for joining us and for this rich discussion. We really do appreciate this opportunity. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.